The spaceship descended through the purple clouds of Zelara, and Jake Morrison felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. He stood at the observation window, watching the alien planet grow larger below them. The surface was covered in crystalline structures that caught the light of 3 distant suns, creating rainbow patterns across the landscape. It was beautiful, but Jake knew beauty could hide danger. First time meeting aliens, Morrison? Commander Lisa Brooks stood beside him, her arms crossed. She had done this kind of mission before, but even she looked tense. First time meeting aliens who could vaporize Earth if we mess this up, Jake replied, trying to smile. He failed. His hands were sweating inside his diplomatic gloves. The Viridian Empire controlled 42 star systems. They had weapons humanity couldn't even understand yet. They had been watching Earth for decades, waiting to see if humans were worth talking to. One wrong move here, one broken rule, and the human race might not get a second chance. Remember the briefing, Lisa said quietly. No touching, not even a handshake. The Viridians consider physical contact between strangers to be deeply offensive. Keep your distance, especially from the royal family. And whatever you do, don't look the queen directly in the eyes. That's considered a challenge to her authority. Jake nodded. He had memorized all the rules during the 3-month journey from Earth. No touching. No direct eye contact with superiors. Bow at a precise 45-degree angle. Speak only when spoken to. The list went on and on. One diplomat on the briefing team had joked that it would be easier to walk through a minefield. The ship landed with barely a sound. Viridian technology was far beyond human engineering. Through the window, Jake could see the Grand Palace rising in the distance. It looked like a mountain made of green glass and silver metal, with towers that reached into the sky. Flags bearing the symbol of the Viridian Empire, the serpent wrapped around a star, flew from every spire. Time to make history, Lisa said. She straightened her uniform and checked her sidearm one last time. Jake knew the weapon was mostly ceremonial. If things went bad here, a pistol wouldn't save them. They walked down the exit ramp with 4 other team members. The air of Zelara was thicker than Earth's, and it smelled like copper and rain. A delegation of Viridian officials waited for them on the landing platform. They were tall, at least 7 feet, with scales that shimmered green and blue in the light. Their eyes were golden and slitted like a snake's, and they wore elaborate robes covered in symbols Jake couldn't read. The lead Viridian stepped forward. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and his voice sounded like gravel grinding together. I am High Counselor Verith. You will follow me. You will not speak unless the Queen addresses you. You will not deviate from the path. Do you understand? We understand, Jake said, bowing at exactly 45 degrees. The other humans copied him. Verith's eyes narrowed, studying them like a predator watching prey. Then he turned and walked toward the palace. The humans followed, surrounded by Viridian guards carrying weapons that hummed with energy. The walk through the palace was like walking through a museum. Everything was cold and perfect. The walls were smooth crystal that reflected their images back at them in distorted ways. There were no decorations, no paintings, no signs of comfort or warmth, just endless corridors of stone and metal. Jake noticed there was no sound except their footsteps. No music, no conversation, nothing. The silence pressed down on him like a weight. They passed other Viridians in the hallways. All of them stopped and stared at the humans with those golden eyes. None of them showed any expression. Their faces could have been carved from stone. Jake wondered if they were curious, afraid, or disgusted. It was impossible to tell. Finally, they reached 2 massive doors covered in intricate carvings. Verith stopped and turned to face them. Beyond these doors is the throne room. The Queen will be present, along with the royal court. There are 300 nobles inside. All of them will be watching you. Do not shame yourselves or your species. The doors opened silently. The throne room was enormous, easily the size of a football field. Tidying, the ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it. Hundreds of Viridians stood in perfect rows on either side of a long aisle that led to a raised platform at the far end. On that platform sat a throne made of what looked like solid diamond, and on that throne sat the Queen. Queen Ashira was terrifying and magnificent at the same time. She was larger than the other Viridians, her scales a deep emerald color that seemed to glow with inner light. She wore a crown of silver that curved around her head like horns, and robes of black that flowed around her like liquid shadow. Her eyes were fixed on the humans as they entered, and Jake felt the weight of that stare even though he kept his own eyes lowered. But it was the small figure beside the throne that caught Jake's attention. A child no more than 7 or 8 years old, if he had to guess. She was much smaller than the adults, her scales a lighter shade of green, almost turquoise. She wore a simple silver circlet on her head. This had to be Princess Lyra, the Queen's daughter. The humans walked down the aisle in complete silence. 300 pairs of golden eyes tracked their every movement. Jake's heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. One foot in front of the other. Don't look up. Don't make a mistake. They reached the base of the platform and stopped. As one, all 6 humans bowed at 45 degrees and held the position. Jake stared at the floor, counting his breaths, waiting. Rise! Queen Ashira's voice filled the room like thunder. It was deeper than Jake expected, resonating with power and authority. They straightened. Jake kept his eyes focused on a point somewhere around the Queen's feet. He began the speech he had practiced 1,000 times. Your Majesty, on behalf of the people of Earth and the United Terran Government, I bring greetings and hope for friendship between our worlds. We come in peace, seeking understanding and mutual problematics. He stopped. Something was wrong. He heard a small gasp from the Viridians around them, then nothing. The silence became absolute. Jake risked a glance upward, and his blood ran cold. Princess Lyra had stood up from her seat beside the throne. She was staring at him with wide, curious eyes, her head tilted to one side, studying him like she had never seen anything like him before, which Jake realized she probably hadn't. Then, before anyone could react, the princess moved. She ran down the steps of the platform, her small feet making soft tapping sounds on the crystal floor. Every guard in the room reached for their weapons. Queen Ashira rose from her throne, her scales shifting from green to a dark, angry red. High Counselor Verith's mouth opened in shock. But Princess Lyra didn't stop. She ran straight toward Jake, her arms outstretched. Before he could think, before he could move, before he could do anything, the young alien princess threw her arms around his waist and hugged him tightly. The entire throne room fell into a silence so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. 300 Viridians stared in absolute shock. This had never happened before. This could not be happening, but it was. And Jake stood frozen, feeling the small arms wrapped around him, knowing that the next few seconds would determine the fate of 2 entire species. Jake Morrison's mind went completely blank. The small princess held on to him like he was a life raft in a storm, her face pressed against his stomach. He could feel her breathing, fast and excited. His arms hung at his sides, frozen in place. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to react, but he couldn't decide what to do. Push her away and insult her? Hold her and break every rule? Stand perfectly still and hope this nightmare ended? The silence stretched on forever. Jake could see Commander Lisa Brooks out of the corner of his eye. Her hand was on her weapon, her face pale. The other human team members looked like statues, terrified to move. Around them, 300 Viridian nobles stood in shock, their mouths open, their scales shifting through colors Jake had never seen in the briefings. On the throne platform, Queen Ashira had gone completely still. Her scales had turned a deep crimson color so dark it was almost black. Her golden eyes were fixed on Jake with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He couldn't tell if she was about to order his execution or simply kill him herself with her bare hands. High Counselor Verith recovered first. His voice came out as a hiss of pure rage. Guards, seize the human. He has defiled the royal bloodline. This is an unforgivable crime against the throne. The Viridian guards moved forward, their weapons raised and humming with deadly energy. Jake's team tensed, ready for a fight they couldn't possibly win. This was it. Humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization was about to end in a bloodbath because a child had hugged him. But then Jake felt something that changed everything. The little princess was trembling. Not from fear, but from something else. He looked down, finally daring to move his head, and saw that she was smiling. Actually smiling. Her golden eyes were bright with happiness, and she looked up at him with such pure joy that it reminded him of his own daughter Emma back on Earth. In that moment, Jake Morrison stopped being a diplomat. He stopped thinking about protocols and rules and interstellar politics. He became what he truly was, a father. And fathers don't push away scared children, no matter what species they are. Slowly, carefully, Jake lowered one hand and gently patted the top of Princess Lyra's head. Her scales were warm and smooth under his palm, like polished stone left in the sun. She made a small, happy sound and hugged him tighter. Stop! Queen Ashira's voice cracked like a whip across the throne room. Every guard froze in place. Every noble held their breath. The queen descended the steps of her platform with slow, deliberate movements. Each footstep echoed in the vast space. She was enormous up close, at least 8 feet tall, and Jake had to tilt his head back to see her face as she approached. She stopped 3 feet away from him. Her eyes moved from Jake to her daughter, then back to Jake. Her scales rippled with colors he couldn't name, emotions he couldn't read. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before, but somehow more dangerous because of it. "You dare to touch the royal heir?" Jake knew he should be terrified. He was terrified, but he also knew that lying or making excuses would be worse than the truth. He met the Queen's eyes, breaking another protocol, and spoke from his heart. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect, but she's a child. Where I come from, when a child reaches out for comfort, we don't see politics or protocol. We just see a child who needs kindness." The Queen's eyes narrowed. Kindness? What is this word? Kindness means treating others with gentleness and care, especially those who are young or vulnerable or scared. "We do not have this concept," Queen Ashira said flatly. "Weakness is not tolerated in the royal line. Emotion is a flaw to be eliminated. My daughter should not have approached you. She should not have touched you." The Queen's voice caught slightly on the last word, so briefly that Jake almost missed it. Princess Lyra finally loosened her grip on Jake and turned to face her mother. She spoke in the Viridian language, her voice high and musical. Jake's translation device worked quickly. "But mother, he feels warm, not cold like everyone here. His face moved when he saw me. It changed shape. The others in the palace never do that. Why does he do that?" Queen Ashira stared at her daughter in silence. Jake realized with sudden horror that the little princess had never seen someone smile before. The thought made his chest ache. The Queen looked back at Jake, and for just a second he saw something flicker in her golden eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. It vanished so quickly he might have imagined it. "High Counselor," the Queen said without looking away from Jake, "clear the throne room. All except my inner council will leave immediately." Verith sputtered in protest. "Your Majesty, this human has committed an act of... Are you questioning my command?" The Queen's scales flashed bright red, and her voice dropped to a dangerous growl. Verith went silent immediately and bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. The nobles filed out of the throne room in complete silence. It took nearly 10 minutes for all of them to leave. Jake stood the entire time with Princess Lyra still holding his hand. She didn't seem to understand the severity of what was happening. She just looked up at him with those curious golden eyes and smiled. When the room was finally empty except for the Queen, 5 council members including Verith and the human delegation, Queen Ashira spoke again. "Explain to me, human, why you did not push my daughter away. Your briefing materials must have explained our customs. You knew that touching royalty without permission is a crime punishable by death. Yet you touched her anyway. Why?" This was the moment that would determine everything. "Your Majesty, I have a daughter. Her name is Emma, and she's 9 years old. If she ran to hug a stranger, I would hope that stranger would be kind to her, not push her away. When I looked at your daughter, I didn't see an alien princess. I saw a little girl who wanted warmth and connection. I couldn't push her away any more than I could stop breathing. It's not in my nature. It's not in human nature." "Human nature," the Queen repeated slowly, testing the words. She looked at her daughter, who was now examining Jake's hand with fascination, comparing his 5 fingers to her own 4-clawed digits. "Tell me about this daughter of yours. Tell me how humans raise their young." Over the next hour, Jake talked. He told the Queen about Emma, about how she loved to draw pictures and leave them on the refrigerator, about bedtime stories and midnight kisses, about playground games and birthday parties, about how humans hugged their children every day, told them they were loved, encouraged them to laugh and play and explore the world with joy. The Queen listened in silence. Her council members shifted uncomfortably. High Counselor Verith looked disgusted, his scales turning a sickly yellow color. But one of the younger council members, a Viridian with blue-green scales who was introduced as Sub-Commander Kale, leaned forward with obvious interest. Princess Lyra eventually sat down on the floor next to Jake's feet, still holding his hand, listening to stories about a world she had never imagined. A world where children were allowed to be children. When Jake finished talking, Queen Ashira was quiet for a long time. Finally she spoke, and her voice was different, softer somehow. More uncertain. "Show me." Jake frowned. "Show you what, Your Majesty? Show me these images of your daughter? Prove to me that what you say is true." Jake looked at Commander Brooks, who hesitated, then nodded. Jake pulled out his personal datapad, the one item they had been allowed to bring that wasn't strictly official. He scrolled through his photos and held it out. The Queen took it carefully, her large clawed hand surprisingly gentle with the small device. She stared at the screen for a long time. Jake had pulled up a photo from Emma's last birthday. She was covered in cake frosting, laughing with pure happiness, surrounded by other children who were also laughing, and messy and joyful. Queen Ashira's scales began to shift through colors rapidly, flickering between green and blue and something that looked almost silver. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with something Jake couldn't identify. "This is how you raise your young? With such chaos? Such disorder? We call it happiness, Your Majesty." The Queen looked down at Princess Lyra, who had fallen asleep on the floor, still clutching Jake's hand. For the first time since he had arrived, Jake saw the Queen's expression change. The mask of cold authority slipped for just a moment, and underneath it was a mother's face. Tired, worried, and heartbreakingly sad. "I need to understand this," the Queen said quietly. "High Counselor Verith, the human delegation will be housed in the eastern wing of the palace. They are to be treated as honored guests, not prisoners. Your Majesty, this is madness. The human violated our most sacred—" "Enough." The Queen's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "I am still your Queen, Verith. Remember that." She turned back to Jake. "You will stay here for 1 month, human. You will teach me about your ways, about this kindness you speak of, about how to raise children with warmth instead of coldness. And if I find that you have lied to me, if this is some trick to weaken our empire, I will destroy your entire world without hesitation. Do you understand?" "I understand, Your Majesty. And I promise you everything I have told you is the truth." The Queen carefully picked up her sleeping daughter, cradling her in ways that looked unpracticed and awkward, like she had never done it before. As she carried Princess Lyra toward a door at the back of the throne room, she paused and looked back at Jake one more time. "Your daughter Emma," she said quietly. "She is fortunate to have you as a father." Then she was gone, leaving Jake standing in the vast empty throne room, wondering what he had just started. The eastern wing of the palace was beautiful and completely lifeless. Jake sat in his assigned room, staring at walls made of pale blue crystal that glowed softly in the dim light. There was a bed, if you could call it that, more like a flat stone platform with a single thin cushion. There was a small table and one chair. Nothing else. No pictures, no colors, no warmth. It felt like living inside a refrigerator. Commander Lisa Brooks sat across from him, her face serious. "You know this is insane, right? We were supposed to be here for 3 days. Sign some papers, smile for the cameras, and go home. Now you've agreed to stay for a month in an alien palace where half the people want you dead." "I know," Jake said quietly. "But did you see her face? The Queen's face when she looked at her daughter? Lisa, there's something broken here. Something deeply wrong with how they live." "That's not our problem to fix," Lisa said, but her voice was uncertain. She had seen the same thing Jake had, the loneliness in Princess Lyra's eyes, the sadness hidden behind Queen Ashira's cold mask. Over the next few days, Jake began to explore the palace under careful guard supervision. What he found disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The palace was enormous, with thousands of rooms and hundreds of staff members, but everywhere he went, there was silence. No laughter, no conversation, no music. Vidians moved through the corridors like ghosts, never speaking unless necessary, never touching, never showing any emotion at all. He saw other young Vidians, children of nobles who lived in the palace. They walked in straight lines behind their tutors, their faces blank, their movements precise. They didn't play. They didn't run. They didn't smile. They just existed, like small robots programmed to become the next generation of cold, emotionless leaders. On the 4th day, Princess Lyra appeared at his door. She stood there silently, her golden eyes watching him with curiosity. 2 guards flanked her, their hands on their weapons, watching Jake like he might explode at any moment. "Hello, Princess," Jake said gently, staying seated so he wouldn't seem threatening. "Would you like to come in?" She nodded and walked inside, moving to sit on the floor near his feet, exactly as she had in the throne room. The guards started to protest, but Lyra held up one small hand and they fell silent. Even at 7 years old, she had the authority of royalty. "Tell me more about your daughter," Lyra said in her soft musical voice. "Tell me about Earth." So Jake talked. He told her about seasons changing, about snow and rain and sunshine. He told her about oceans and forests and animals. He told her about schools where children learned together, about parks where they played games, about families that ate dinner together and shared stories about their day. Lyra listened with complete focus, her eyes growing wider with each story. "And the children on Earth," she said slowly, "they are allowed to touch each other? To play together?" "Of course," Jake said. "Children need connection. They need friends. They need to know they're not alone." "I am alone," Lyra said simply, as if stating a fact as basic as the sky being blue. Mother says it is necessary, that future queens must be strong, and strength comes from isolation. She says her mother taught her the same way, and her mother before that, going back hundreds of years. Jake's heart broke a little. Can I show you something? He pulled out his datapad and found a video of Emma's school play from last year. Emma had played a tree in the background, barely visible, but she had been so proud. The video showed dozens of children on stage, some forgetting their lines, some waving at their parents, all of them having the time of their lives. The audience was laughing and clapping, full of joy and pride. Lyra watched the video 3 times in complete silence. When it ended, she looked up at Jake with tears in her golden eyes. Jake didn't know Viridians could cry. Apparently neither did the guards, because they shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do. Is this real? Lyra whispered. Or is it a story? It's real. This is how children live on Earth. This is what childhood should be. I want that, Lyra said, her voice cracking. I want to laugh like that. I want friends. I want my mother to hold me without looking ashamed afterward. The guards looked away, suddenly very interested in the walls. Jake realized this conversation was probably breaking their hearts too. They were Viridians, raised in the same cold system, and they were starting to question everything they had been taught. That night, Jake was summoned to the Queen's private study. It was smaller than he expected, with walls lined with books and data crystals. Queen Ashira sat behind a large desk, still wearing her crown, but looking somehow smaller than she had in the throne room. Tired. My daughter spent 3 hours with you today, the Queen said without preamble. She came to me afterward and asked why I never play with her. She asked why she has no friends. She asked if she could go to Earth and attend one of your schools. Jake stayed silent, letting the Queen continue. I did not know how to answer her, Ashira continued, her voice quiet. No one has ever asked me these questions before. I was raised the same way I am raising her. My mother believed that emotion was weakness, that a ruler must be cold and calculating to make difficult decisions, that love makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Your Majesty, Jake said carefully, can I ask you something personal? She nodded slowly. Do you love your daughter? Her hands gripped the edge of the desk so hard that cracks appeared in the stone. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I don't know. I was never taught what love feels like. I know I would destroy worlds to protect her. I know that when she was born, I felt something I had never felt before. Something so powerful, it terrified me. But whether that is love or simply biological instinct, I cannot say. That's love, Your Majesty. That feeling that terrifies you. That's what it means to be a parent. And the fact that you're questioning how you were raised, that you're asking these hard questions, that proves you love her more than you know. The Queen stood and walked to the window, looking out over her city of crystal and metal. 300 years ago, our people were different. We had art, music, joy, but then came the Civil War. Emotions were blamed for the conflict. Leaders who loved their people too much were considered weak, easy to manipulate. So we changed. We became cold. We eliminated weakness. We survived. But at what cost? Jake asked quietly. At the cost of everything that makes life worth living, the Queen said, still staring out the window. I see that now. I look at your images of Earth, of children laughing and playing, and I realize we have been slowly dying for 3 centuries. Not physically, but in every way that matters. She turned to face him, and for the first time, Jake saw her without her mask. She wasn't a terrifying alien queen. She was just a mother, confused and scared and desperate to do right by her child. Teach me, she said. Teach me how to be warm again, how to show my daughter that she is loved, how to be the mother she deserves instead of the cold statue I have become. Oh. Over the following weeks, Jake became a strange fixture in the palace. He taught Princess Lyra about art, showing her how to draw pictures of things she imagined. Her first drawings were stiff and formal, but slowly they became more creative. She drew pictures of Earth, of children playing, of a version of herself with friends and smiles. He introduced the concept of games, simple ones at first, like guessing games and riddles. Lyra was terrible at them initially because she had been taught that every action must have a serious purpose. But gradually she learned to play just for the fun of it. Her laughter, when it finally came, was like music in the silent palace. Other young Viridians started appearing in the corridors when Jake walked by. They would peek around corners, watching him with hungry eyes. They wanted what Lyra was getting, but were too afraid to ask. So Jake started leaving his door open. One child came in, then two, then five. Before long, he had a small classroom of young Viridians learning about emotions and connection and joy. The palace staff began to change, too. Guards who had been cold and distant started nodding to him in the hallways. Servants who had moved like silent machines began humming quietly while they worked. It was small, subtle, but it was there. A crack in the ice that had frozen this civilization for 300 years. But not everyone was happy about the changes. High Counselor Verith watched everything with growing anger. He gathered other traditionalists, older Viridians, who believed the old ways were the only ways. They met in secret, speaking in whispers about the human who was corrupting their people, about the queen who had grown weak, about the need to restore proper order before it was too late. Sub-Commander Kale, the young council member with blue-green scales, brought the rumors to Jake one evening. "You need to be careful," Kale said, his voice low. "Verith is planning something. I don't know what, but he believes you are destroying our civilization. He has support among the older generation." "What about you?" Jake asked. "What do you believe?" Kale was quiet for a moment, then said, "I believe my daughter deserves to smile. I believe I have wasted 40 years of my life pretending not to feel anything. I believe you humans might be saving us from ourselves." He paused. "But I also believe Verith will try to kill you before he lets that happen." Jake reported the conversation to Commander Brooks, who immediately increased security around the human delegation. But Jake knew that if the Viridians truly wanted them dead, there was little they could do to stop it. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the alien city below, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. He had come here to build a bridge between species, but instead he might have started a civil war. Then he heard a soft sound at his door. Princess Lyra stood there in her sleeping clothes, holding a piece of paper. She walked to him and held it out silently. It was a drawing, crude and childish, but beautiful in its simplicity. It showed two figures holding hands. One was tall and green with scales, one was smaller and pink with no scales. Above them she had written in careful English letters, "Friends." Jake looked down at the little princess, and she looked up at him with eyes full of trust and hope. In that moment, he knew that whatever happened next, whatever danger was coming, it had been worth it. "Yes," he said softly, gently touching the top of her head. "Friends." The change in the palace was impossible to ignore now. It had been 3 weeks since Jake arrived, and the cold, silent halls had begun to feel almost alive. Young Viridians gathered in small groups, whispering to each other instead of walking alone. Someone had started playing music in the gardens, soft and hesitant at first, but growing bolder each day. The palace staff no longer moved like machines. They smiled sometimes, small and uncertain, but real. Queen Ashira had changed most of all. She spent hours each day with her daughter now, learning to play simple games, reading stories together, practicing the art of showing affection. It was awkward and clumsy, like learning to walk after years of paralysis, but she was trying. Jake watched them one afternoon in the garden, the queen sitting on the ground despite her royal robes, helping Lyra build a tower out of colored stones. When the tower fell over, Lyra laughed, and the queen laughed too. The sound was rusty and strange, as if her throat had forgotten how, but it was genuine. But in the darker corners of the palace, anger grew like poison. High Counselor Verith no longer hid his disgust. He openly criticized the queen in council meetings, suggesting she had been compromised by human weakness. Other older Viridians joined him, traditionalists who saw the changes as a threat to everything their civilization had built over 3 centuries. "The human is a disease," Verith told his followers during secret meetings in the lower levels of the palace. "He infects our young with softness. He turns our queen into a fool. He will destroy us from within, and we will be too busy playing his childish games to notice until it's too late." Sub-Commander Kale tried to warn Jake again, more urgently this time. "They're planning something for tomorrow night. There's a formal dinner to celebrate the upcoming treaty signing. All the human delegation will be there along with the entire royal court. Security will be divided, attention will be scattered. If I were planning an assassination, that's when I would strike." "Have you told the queen?" Jake asked. "I have no proof, only suspicions. And Verith is still a High Counselor. His word carries weight. If I accuse him without evidence, I could start a civil war myself." Kale's scales shifted to a worried gray color. "I'm telling you this because you should prepare. Keep your people close. Be ready to move quickly if something goes wrong." That night, Jake called a meeting with Commander Brooks and the rest of the human team. They sat in his room, speaking in low voices, making plans they hoped they wouldn't need to use. We could request an early departure, one team member suggested. Call for emergency extraction, get back to the ship before tomorrow night. If we run now, everything we've built here falls apart. The Queen will lose face. The traditionalists will use it as proof that humans are weak and untrustworthy. Lyra will go back to her cold, isolated life. We can't let that happen. Lisa Brooks nodded slowly. Then we stay alert. We watch for threats. And if something happens, we protect each other and get to the landing pad as fast as possible. She looked at Jake with serious eyes. But Morrison, if this goes bad, we might not all make it out. You understand that? The formal dinner the next evening was held in the palace's grand hall. Long tables were arranged in a vast room, with ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. Hundreds of Viridians attended, all dressed in elaborate robes covered in gems and precious metals. The human delegation sat near the royal table, close enough to the Queen and Princess Lyra to be considered honored guests, but far enough away to maintain proper distance. The food was strange but surprisingly good. Viridian cuisine involved a lot of crystallized fruits and proteins that tasted like a mix of fish and chicken. Jake tried to eat while staying aware of his surroundings. He noticed Verith sitting across the hall, surrounded by older Viridians with dark, serious faces. They weren't eating. They were watching. Princess Lyra seemed happy despite the formal atmosphere. She kept looking over at Jake and smiling, a small secret smile that said she would rather be drawing pictures or playing games than sitting through this boring dinner. Queen Ashira noticed and whispered something to her daughter. Lyra nodded and sat up straighter, trying to be proper, but the smile didn't completely leave her face. The speeches began after dinner. Various council members stood and talked about the historic nature of the Human-Viridian Alliance, about cooperation between species, about building a better future together. The words were nice but felt empty, like reading from a script no one truly believed. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he stood and kept it simple. We came to your world as strangers. You welcomed us, despite your doubts and fears. In return, we hope we've shown you that being different doesn't mean being enemies. We've learned from you, and perhaps you've learned something from us too. The future belongs to those brave enough to change when change is needed. Some of the younger Viridians applauded. The older ones, Verith's faction, remained silent and stone-faced. The dinner was ending when it happened. The lights in the hall suddenly went dark. Emergency crystals along the walls provided a dim glow, but most of the room fell into shadow. Shouts of confusion erupted from all directions. Jake heard Lisa Brooks curse and felt her hand grab his arm. "Stay close," she hissed. "Everyone together, now." The human team formed a tight circle, their backs to each other, trying to see in the darkness. Around them, Viridians were moving, but it was impossible to tell who was running away from danger and who was running toward it. Then Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. Princess Lyra was screaming. He didn't think. He just moved. He pulled away from Lisa's grip and ran toward where he had last seen the royal table. Other shapes were moving in that direction too, dark figures that glided through the shadows with purpose. Assassins. Jake crashed into one of them, using his weight to knock the figure off balance. He heard a weapon discharge, saw a flash of blue energy that scorched the wall behind him. Hands grabbed him, claws tearing at his clothes. He fought back blindly, throwing punches in the dark, not knowing if he was hitting friend or enemy. More lights came on suddenly, harsh and bright. Palace guards were pouring into the hall from all directions. And in the center of the chaos, Jake saw Princess Lyra. She was on the ground near the overturned royal table, her arm bleeding from a deep cut. Standing over her with a weapon raised was High Counselor Verith himself. "This ends now," Verith snarled. "The corruption ends, the weakness ends. We return to the old ways, to strengthen." Princess Lyra moved faster than Jake thought possible for a child. She rolled away from Verith and screamed, not in fear but in fury. "Guards, help! The human tried to save me, and this traitor tried to kill me." Palace guards surrounded Verith immediately, their weapons trained on him. He looked around in shock and growing horror as more guards appeared, as Sub-Commander Kale stepped forward with a data crystal in his hand. "We've been monitoring you for days, Verith," Kale said coldly. "Every secret meeting, every treasonous word, every conspirator, we have it all recorded. You didn't just try to assassinate a human diplomat. You tried to kill the heir to the throne." Verith's scales turned almost white with rage. "You're all fools. Can't you see what the human has done to us? He's made us weak. He's destroyed 3 centuries of discipline and... Enough." Queen Ashira's voice cut through the hall like a blade of ice. She emerged from behind an overturned table, her crown missing, her robes torn, but her presence more commanding than ever. She walked to where her daughter lay bleeding and knelt beside her. For a moment, the mask of the Cold Queen threatened to slip back into place. Then she gathered Lyra into her arms, holding her close, blood and all. "You're safe," the Queen whispered, loud enough for the hall to hear. "I'm here." "Mother's here," clung to her, crying openly. "The human saved me, Mother. Jake ran to help me even though it was dangerous. He didn't think about rules or safety. He just came because I was scared." Queen Ashira looked up at Jake, who was being held by 2 guards, his clothes torn and blood running from a cut on his forehead. Their eyes met across the hall. In that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, respect, gratitude. The Queen stood slowly, still holding her daughter. She looked at Verith with eyes that promised death. "You tried to kill my child. You tried to destroy the first real hope our people have had in 300 years. And you did it claiming to protect our strength." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but everyone heard every word. "True strength isn't the absence of emotion, Counselor. True strength is having the courage to feel, to love, to change, even when it terrifies you." She turned to address the entire hall. Viridians from both factions watched her with wide eyes. "For 3 centuries we have been told that coldness is power, that isolation is safety, that love is weakness. But look at what that philosophy created. It created a high counselor who would murder a child to preserve a system. It created a culture where my own daughter had never heard laughter until a human showed her what joy looks like." The Queen's scales shifted through colors, emotions playing across her face for everyone to see. "I declare the old ways finished. From this day forward, young Viridians will be raised with warmth and connection. Emotions will not be suppressed but honored. We will learn from the humans, and we will remember what it means to be truly alive, not just surviving." Some of the older Viridians looked horrified. But the younger ones, those who had been sneaking into Jake's lessons, those who had been secretly teaching their own children to smile, they stood and applauded. The sound grew, filling the hall, until even some of the traditionalists reluctantly joined in. Verith and his conspirators were dragged away. Medical staff rushed to treat Princess Lyra's wound while she refused to let go of her mother. Jake was helped to a chair, his head spinning from the blow he had taken during the fight. Commander Brooks appeared beside him, her face pale but relieved. "You absolute idiot," she said, but there was affection in her voice. "You ran toward an assassination attempt in the dark." "Couldn't let anything happen to her," Jake said, his words slightly slurred from the head injury. "She's just a kid. You're just a diplomat who somehow started a revolution," Lisa replied, shaking her head. "Anthropology departments back on Earth are going to study this for centuries." As the medical staff worked on his injuries, Jake watched Queen Ashira across the hall. She was still holding Lyra, rocking her gently, whispering comfort. The cold, terrifying queen was gone. In her place was just a mother, scared and relieved and grateful that her daughter was alive. Their eyes met again, and the Queen mouthed 2 words in English, words Jake had taught her just days ago. "Thank you." Jake nodded and closed his eyes, exhausted beyond measure, but knowing that something important had changed tonight, not just for the Viridians, but for the future of both their species. The morning after the assassination attempt, Jake woke in the palace medical wing with the worst headache of his life. His vision was blurry, and every movement made his skull throb. A Viridian doctor with gentle hands and pale green scales checked his injuries and assured him he would recover fully. The cut on his head had been sealed with some kind of alien medical gel that tingled against his skin. Commander Lisa Brooks sat in a chair beside his bed, her arms crossed and her expression torn between relief and anger. "You've been unconscious for 14 hours. The Queen has been here twice to check on you. So has Princess Lyra, though they wouldn't let her stay long because of her own injuries." "Is she okay?" Jake asked immediately, trying to sit up and regretting it as pain shot through his head. "She's fine." The cut on her arm wasn't deep. "She'll have a scar, but the doctors say it will heal cleanly." Lisa leaned forward. "Jake, what you did was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. You saved the princess's life. You also nearly got yourself killed." "I know," Jake said quietly. "But I couldn't just stand there." "I know you couldn't," Lisa replied with a small smile. "That's why you're the diplomat and I'm the soldier. You see a scared child, I see a tactical situation. The galaxy needs both kinds of people, I guess." Over the next few days, Jake learned the full extent of what had happened. Verith and 23 other conspirators had been arrested. Subcommander Kale had been running a counterintelligence operation for weeks, tracking the traditionalists, recording their meetings, building evidence. The assassination attempt had been expected, which was why extra guards had been stationed nearby, ready to respond the moment the lights went out. "We couldn't stop the attempt entirely," Kale explained when he visited Jake in the medical wing. "We needed them to act, to prove their treason beyond any doubt, but we tried to minimize the danger. I'm sorry you and the princess were put at risk. What will happen to Verith? Jake asked. Kale's expression darkened. In the old days, he would have been executed immediately, but the Queen has chosen a different path. He and the other conspirators will be exiled to a colony world. They'll live out their lives there apart from the empire they tried to preserve. It's a more merciful punishment than they deserve. But the Queen says she wants to prove that strength and compassion can coexist. The trial was held 3 days later in the same throne room where Jake had first met Princess Lyra. This time the room was different. Someone had hung colorful banners along the walls. Young Vidians sat with their parents instead of standing in rigid lines. There was even music playing softly in the background, something that would have been unthinkable before. Verith stood before the throne, his scales dull gray, his eyes defiant even in defeat. Queen Ashira sat in judgment, her daughter beside her. Lyra's arm was bandaged, but she sat straight and proud, no longer the shy, lonely child she had been a month ago. The Queen's voice rang through the hall. High Counselor Verith, you have been found guilty of treason, attempted murder of the royal heir, conspiracy against the throne, and crimes against the peace. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Verith lifted his head high. I regret nothing. I acted to preserve our civilization from the weakness that will destroy us. History will prove me right. When your empire falls because you chose emotion over strength, future generations will remember that I tried to stop it. You speak of strength, but you understand nothing of it. You tried to kill a child because you were afraid of change. That is not strength. That is cowardice. She paused, her scales shifting to a deep, determined blue. You and your conspirators are hereby sentenced to permanent exile. You will be taken to the outer colonies, where you can build a society as cold and lifeless as your hearts. Perhaps there you will find the world you wish to preserve. Verith was wed away, still defiant, still convinced he was right. But Jake noticed that none of the younger Vidians looked at him with respect. They looked at him with pity and something close to disgust. The old ways were dying, and everyone could feel it. After the trial, Queen Ashira invited Jake to her private quarters. It was the first time he had seen this part of the palace. Unlike the cold, formal spaces everywhere else, these rooms were starting to show signs of life. There were drawings on the walls, Princess Lyra's artwork. There were toys scattered on the floor, things the Queen had ordered made based on descriptions of Earth toys. There was even a photograph of Jake's family sitting on a table, a gift he had given to Lyra weeks ago. The Queen poured him something that looked like tea but tasted like honey and starlight. They sat across from each other, not as diplomat and monarch, but as two people who had survived something dangerous together. In 3 days, the treaty will be signed, the Queen said. Formal alliance between the Vidian Empire and the United Terran government, trade routes, cultural exchanges, mutual defense, all the official things that politicians care about. She paused. But the real treaty was signed the day my daughter hugged you and you didn't push her away. Your Majesty? Jake began, but she held up a hand. Please, in private, call me Ashira. I think we've moved past titles and formality, don't you? Jake smiled. Ashira, then. Can I ask you something? That day in the throne room, when Lyra first hugged me, you looked like you wanted to kill me. But you didn't. Why? Ashira was quiet for a long time, staring into her cup. Because when I saw her holding you, smiling at you, I felt two things. First, rage that someone had broken our protocols, that my carefully controlled world was falling apart. But second, she looked up at him with vulnerable eyes. I felt jealousy. My daughter was showing affection to a stranger, openly and freely, and I realized she had never shown it to me because I had never allowed it. I had never shown her that it was acceptable. In that moment, I saw what I had become, what we had all become, and I was horrified. You're changing that now, Jake said gently. I see you with her. You're learning. You're trying. 3 centuries of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Sometimes I catch myself falling back into the old patterns. Being cold, being distant, suppressing what I feel. But Lyra reminds me, she's so much braver than I ever was. She embraces this new way completely, without fear. As if summoned by her name, Princess Lyra burst into the room, followed by 2 young Vidians Jake recognized from his informal classes. They were laughing about something, their scales bright with happiness. When Lyra saw Jake, her face lit up even more. Jake, you're here. Mother, can Jake come see what we made? We built a whole city out of the building blocks you ordered. It has parks and schools and places for families to be together. It's like the Earth cities Jake told us about. Ashira smiled. a real smile that reached her eyes. "Perhaps after we finish talking, little one. Can you give us a few more minutes?" "Okay." Lyra ran to her mother and hugged her quickly, unselfconsciously, then ran back out with her friends. The sound of children's laughter echoed down the hallway. Ashira watched them go, her expression soft. 6 months ago, those children would have been walking in silence, alone, learning that joy was inappropriate. Now listen to them. "This is what you've given us, Jake Morrison. Future... life." The treaty signing ceremony 3 days later was broadcast across both the Viridian Empire and human space. Billions watched as Queen Ashira and the human ambassador signed the formal documents establishing alliance between their peoples. But the moment that everyone would remember, the image that would be shown in history books for generations, came at the end. Princess Lyra, standing beside her mother in a beautiful silver gown, walked across the stage to where Jake stood with the human delegation. Without hesitation, without protocol, she hugged him. And then she turned and hugged her mother, pulling both of them together. The three of them stood there, human and Viridian, different species united by something as simple and powerful as caring for a child. The throne room erupted in applause. Not the stiff, formal applause of before, but real, enthusiastic celebration. Young Viridians cheered. Their parents smiled. Even the guards seemed moved by the moment. In the weeks that followed, changes swept through the Viridian Empire like a wave. Schools were restructured to include play and creativity. Laws were rewritten to allow public displays of affection. Art and music flourished after centuries of suppression. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. Many older Viridians struggled with the changes, uncomfortable with a world so different from what they had known. But the younger generation embraced it completely. The cultural exchange programs began immediately. Viridian children were selected to attend schools on Earth, living with human families, learning what childhood could be. Human teachers traveled to Viridian worlds, showing their methods, their warmth, their way of nurturing young minds. It was the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history, two species not just allied politically, but genuinely learning to understand each other. A year after that first meeting, Jake returned to the Viridian homeworld with his family. His daughter Emma had begged to come, fascinated by the stories of the alien princess who had changed history with a hug. When their ship landed, Princess Lyra was waiting at the spaceport, bouncing with excitement. The two girls met, studied each other for exactly 3 seconds, and then ran off together to play like they had been friends forever. Queen Ashira and Jake watched them go, smiling. "Your daughter is lovely," Ashira said. "Lyra has talked about nothing else for weeks." "Thank you for inviting us," Jake replied. "Emma has been driving us crazy with questions about your world." They walked through the palace together, and Jake marveled at the transformation. The cold, silent halls were gone. Now there were colors everywhere, artwork from both human and Viridian children hanging on the walls. He heard laughter echoing from distant rooms. He saw families walking together, holding hands, talking freely. The palace felt alive in a way it never had before. In the garden, they found the two girls already deep in a game of their own invention, mixing rules from Earth games and Viridian traditions into something entirely new. Other children had joined them, both species playing together without hesitation or prejudice. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Lyra hadn't run to you that day," Ashira said quietly. "If she had stayed in her seat, followed protocol, remained the cold, lonely child she was supposed to be. But she didn't," Jake said. "She saw something different and ran toward it with open arms. That took courage. She's braver than any soldier I've ever met." "She learned that from you," Ashira said. "From humans. You taught us that showing vulnerability, asking for connection, choosing warmth over coldness, those are not weaknesses. They are the strongest things anyone can do." As the sun set over the crystal city, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jake thought about how strange and wonderful the universe was. He had come to this world as a diplomat, expecting to negotiate trade agreements and defense treaties. Instead, he had helped an entire civilization remember how to feel. He watched the children playing, human and Viridian together, building a future neither species could have imagined alone. And he thought about the moment that started it all, when a lonely little girl ran to a stranger and asked for something as simple as warmth. Sometimes, Jake realized, the smallest acts of courage changed everything. Sometimes a hug could reshape the galaxy. And sometimes the best thing humanity had to offer the universe wasn't technology, or weapons, or even knowledge. It was remembering that everyone, no matter how different they looked, deserved kindness, connection, and love. The alien queen's daughter had run to hug a human, and the palace had been shocked into silence. But from that silence grew something beautiful. A friendship between worlds. A future built on compassion. and proof that the bravest thing anyone could do was choose to care when the universe expected coldness. Jake smiled, watching Emma and Lyra laugh together under the alien sky, and knew that humanity's place in the cosmos was secure. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they remembered, even among the stars, that kindness mattered most of all.